Thursday. It's always my most favorite part of the week. I'll remind everyone to please mute. Looks like everybody whose box I can see is muted, which is great. And if you missed the conversation about closed captioning earlier, you should be able to slide down to the bottom of your screen and see a button that says CC, Show Captions. And if you press that, the magical Zoom captioners will let you know what we're saying. So take advantage of that feature if you like. If you have questions while we're together today, please feel free to use the chat feature, and Dr. Beasley, I will monitor the chat so you don't have to worry about that. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then after the presentation, I think Dr. Beasley might be willing to take some questions live if you want to unmute yourself. So we'll do that. I think those are all the housekeeping notes for today, May 16th. We're halfway through May already, and it's unbelievable to me. Time flies though when you're having fun, and I always am having fun on our weekly webinar. So speaking of that, I am delighted to introduce our speaker for the day, Dr. Brent Beasley, who is a physician who has been in practice for 30 years. And he's here today to talk about his experience on that side. And as you may have noticed, the title I used for our opening slide said "From the Other Side." And so Dr. Beasley is generous enough to share his own experience of having been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I heard Dr. Beasley speak about a month ago at another community forum and thought, well, my goodness, the weekly webinar folks have got to hear this wonderful person who is so kind to share his story. So Dr. Beasley earned his medical degree and his Master of Business Administration from the University of Oklahoma in Tulsa. And he has published a first-person account of his experience in the Journal of General Internal Medicine, and that was in February of 2024. I have a copy of it. Dr. Beasley, would you be willing for me to share it with folks if they'd like to read it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I knew he was going to say that. So if you're interested in reading Dr. Beasley's journal article, send an email to myalliance@kumc.edu. I will put that in the chat, and I'll be happy to share the PDF of that. So with that being said, let's let Dr. Beasley take over. He's got some great slides and some great information to share. And one more point of privilege, just because I can. I recognize a lot of names and a lot of faces today, and I'm super excited to recognize that my mom has joined us for the day. And she's the one whose name says Zoom user, and that is just precious to me. Thank you, Mom, for being here. Dr. Beasley, you should feel very honored that my mom is here. And if you are ever wondering where did this come from, you can blame her. So that being said, welcome, Mom. Welcome, everybody on the webinar. And Dr. Beasley, all yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. And before we start, I do want to say I'm so happy your mom is with us. The second thing I'm going to let you know is my right hand, my wife, is here to help me as well. One of the things that you should know is that technology is not easy for people with Alzheimer's disease. And so my wife is here to make sure that it goes as smoothly for me on my side that it does on your side. So yeah, let me share my screen. There we go. And share. Okay. So I've titled this "Getting Alzheimer's Disease and Getting Treated for Alzheimer's Disease," or "Why Do I Have Alzheimer's Disease and Why Few People with Alzheimer's Disease Are Receiving Treatment." And again, I'm not getting any reimbursement or anything for this, and I'm not expecting it, but I just, I'm supposed to say those things at the beginning of these. This is a picture, sorry, these are pictures of people that are important to me. And I think in healthcare, it's important for us to remember that our patients have lives and loves. These photos represent people I love and things I enjoy. I have a grandson who's 5 months old named Francis. I'm married to Cindy. I may cry during this. I have a grandson, sorry, I'm married to Cindy. I have a son, Andrew, and two daughters, Bridget, an internal medicine resident at KU, and Catherine, who is 25 and is looking for a job in HR management. Uh, and when you look at these pictures, the fellows on the right are my best friends from high school. We still get together yearly. I geek out about Star Trek and comic books. I love Beatles music, and I play the guitar and piano, and I'm a deacon in my church. As a challenge, I encourage you to have your patients bring their favorite photo albums to your visit and have them tell you about their lives and their loves. To start off, both of my grandfathers were World War II vets. I like to imagine them when they were in their 20s. My paternal grandfather, Marvin Beasley, joined the Navy and was sent to San Diego, but was sent home with, quote, chest pains, which were probably anxiety. My maternal grandfather, Paul Capps, served in the Army Air Force, dropped supplies by parachute to our forces, but got separated from his team and traveled with Merrill's Marauders, an Army long-range penetration special operations jungle warfare unit, which fought in Southeast Asia. He suffered from shell shock when he got home. Both of my grandfathers died with dementia, Marvin at 94 and Paul at 88, having outlived their wives who both died of cancer. I love these iconic family photos of my father, Fred, with his father, and the photo of my young mother with her cousin. My mom and dad, my mom met my dad in college. Dad became a respected business manager in Tulsa. I grew up with the love and support of my parents and have two younger brothers, one an accountant and the other an anesthesiologist. When I look at this photo, Dad was just a kid. He died November of 2023 with Alzheimer's disease at 82 years old. My mother is sharp as a tack at 79 and just returned from Liechtenstein, where she visited her great grandchild. I was raised in Tulsa. I finished medical school and residency at the University of Oklahoma Tulsa campus in 95, and I completed a general internal medicine fellowship at Johns Hopkins in 97. I worked as an internal medicine residency program director for 17 years. And I then returned to residency education as vice chair of the Department of Medicine for 5 years in Tulsa. But we missed our friends and family in Kansas City, so we moved back. I thought I would give the VA a try, give back to the community, help the vets. During this time, I had very mild COVID lasting a few days, and that will be important for us to discuss later. So hold on to that thought. Soon I realized the computer system at the VA was the same one I used when I was a resident all those years ago. And though the VA promised to install the Cerner EMR, it wasn't going to happen soon enough for me. By the way, it still hasn't happened. We went on a family vacation, and my adult children started wondering why Dad kept asking the same questions repeatedly and couldn't recall rules to the new board game. We laughed and chalked it up to COVID fog. Soon after the vacation, I found another job in town at Oak Street Health, a nationwide primary care organization. And after a few months, my medical director asked to meet with me. Oak Street used virtual scribes, and the scribes told my medical director that I was asking the same questions repeatedly to patients. The medical director asked, "What is wrong with you?" At that point, I was invited to meet with the human resources and let go. I had not recognized I had a problem. At least I didn't think it was that bad. I called a neurologist friend whose name is Jeff Kaplan, and he recommended that I meet with Dr. Jeff Burns at the KU Memory Center. Thus began my own personal odyssey. I had a complete memory test that was one of the biggest slogs of my life. I had an MRI, I had SPECT scans, I had a spinal tap. I performed dozens of spinal taps as an internal medicine resident. I guess this was paybacks. As you can see, my CSF protein level was 61 with a normal range of 15 to 45. My p-tau A beta 42 ratio was 0.046, which again was high. And one of the things that we need to touch base on is that there's three possible types of APOE. Now, these are the genes for making a protein called apolipoprotein, and it's very important in the base of the brain and in our nerves. And so these different possible types of APOE confer the increase or decrease risk for getting Alzheimer's disease. If you get two of the E4 gene copies, you have a significant risk for developing Alzheimer's as you age. If you have two E2 gene copies, you have a decreased risk. My APOE genetic profile were two copies of APOE3, which really was supposed to confer me no increased risk. So why did I get Alzheimer's disease at 57 years old? I definitely have it, but I don't have the genetics. We saw the p-tau level and the elevated protein level in my CSF. Could my COVID diagnosis have impacted me, shifting my age of diagnosis downward rather than in my older age like my father and grandfathers? I thought we'd take a moment and see what the evidence shows. Some of you may be familiar with using PubMed, and if you have yet to explore it, I recommend you start looking. One of the things you can do, if you see over on the right, I can actually customize some things and keep searches fresh. As you can see, I've signed into PubMed. You can see my name. I've used the search terms Alzheimer's disease and crossed it with COVID-19, both terms in quotes to ensure I get a more focused search. There were 933 articles that came up first using those terms. And then I can see, however, other options such as Cochrane Review or evidence search that helps refine my search better. So for those who may not know it, it was recognized early in the pandemic that patients with dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, were very susceptible to succumbing to COVID-19. So we remember how careful we were to make sure that our older patients did not get COVID-19. That was a real high priority. So we're going to come back to that in a moment. I clicked the evidence search at the bottom of the list, which gives me a focus number of 26 articles to review based on my search terms. I did a few more searches to expand my possible selections. And I wound up reviewing 66 abstracts, sorted through the findings, and it was interesting to land on one of the earliest reports from Case Western in 2022. This was 3 years after COVID-19 hit. Wang and colleagues used a matched cohort study of older adults 65 and up. There were 6 million people over the age of 65, including 410,000 in the COVID-19 cohort and 5.8 million in the non-COVID-19 cohort. The outcome was the 180-day risk for new Alzheimer's disease between the propensity match scores and COVID-19 versus non-COVID-19. What they found, and you can see over to the side, the hazard ratio for people to be getting actual Alzheimer's disease. They compared the 180-day risk for new diagnosis and as we see, the non-COVID-19 cohort were similar, who had no documented COVID-19 in their EHRs, but had medical encounters between February 2020 through May 2021. Cohorts were matched for demographics such as age, gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic factors, and Alzheimer's disease-related comorbidities and behavioral factors. As seen on the slide, in every category, except for the Hispanic patients, because there weren't as many, we don't see a strong confidence interval on the Hispanic, fewer Hispanic patients in this study. But in every one of them, we see that there was a strong confidence interval with a hazard ratio showing that people with COVID-19 were going into Alzheimer's disease. And the discussion, older adults with COVID-19 were at significantly increased risk for a new diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease with high risk in people aged greater than 85 and in women. Study limitations included potential biases introduced because it was an observational study and its retrospective nature and inaccuracy sometimes in perhaps some of those Alzheimer's disease diagnoses, which should not substantially affect the relative risk analysis since all cohorts were from the same data set. Next steps, they said, would include validation from other data resources, longer-term follow-up mechanisms, understanding and examining other types of dementia. So we see in this early study that there might be this connection. The next one I wanted to bring to you, new onset neurodegenerative diseases as long-term sequela of SARS-CoV-2 infection, a systematic review and meta-analysis. This one was from 2023. They calculated the pooled effect size, used hazard ratios again, and confidence intervals. This included that they combined multiple studies. So it's a systematic review, which means they took a whole lot of studies about this and pooled them all together. So the total patients that they had once they pooled all these together were 33 million. There were 2,688,000 post-COVID-19 cases and 30,458,000 controls. There was a significant association of COVID-19. The hazard ratio for Alzheimer's was 1.5. For dementia was 1.6. And get this, even they noticed increase in Parkinson's after having had COVID. So the conclusion here was that SARS-CoV-2 infection may be associated with higher chance for new onset neurodegenerative diseases in recovered COVID-19 patients. Future studies are warranted to determine the biological mechanisms underlying the neurodegenerative consequences of COVID-19 and the long-term sequela of the SARS-CoV-2 infection. The next one that I wanted to show to you was the Lee study real quick. Alzheimer's disease patients, they started off saying, are more likely to suffer COVID-19. As we said, remember that, as I told you, to hold on to that fact, those older adults with Alzheimer's, for some reason, were dying quicker from COVID-19. The chance of Alzheimer's disease after COVID-19, they said, is higher, including all the biomarkers, the beta amyloid, the p-tau, the glial fibrillary acid protein, the neurofilament light chain, all increased to levels observed in Alzheimer's disease. And that CoV-2 can alter the blood-brain barrier and damage neurons directly in the hippocampus. The next study that I brought to you was a Mendelian randomization study. And just so that we all have some baseline of understanding what that means, a Mendelian randomization study examines how certain behaviors, environments, or other factors lead to specified health outcomes by looking at genetic differences that the way people's bodies react to the behavior or environmental factors. So on this one, this was called a causal effect of COVID-19 on Alzheimer's disease, a Mendelian randomization study. And this one was from August of 22. They looked at genetic correlations and Mendelian randomization analysis to assess the genetic relationships. So the actual genes in our bodies and the genes in COVID-19 and the potential causal association between AD and COVID-19. This is a quote. It indicated that Alzheimer's disease had a significant possible genetic correlation with hospitalized COVID-19. Our study suggests that severe COVID-19 may contribute to the development of Alzheimer's disease while suffering a mild case of COVID, not increase the risk. Now, I actually had a mild case of COVID. And while not everybody that got mild cases of COVID got Alzheimer's, I am starting to believe, after looking at these different studies, that this may have been what tipped me over in my journey. This was another study by Ramadi, and this one was from 2023. New onset neurodegenerative disease as long-term sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection, a systematic review and meta-analysis. 12 studies they took, and they combined those 12 studies. Again, it's a systematic review. So you take all these studies and combine them together so you have more power to see what could be the possibility. So these 12 studies were included in the meta-analysis. The pooled analysis compared control groups, showed a significant association between SARS-CoV-2 infection and an increased risk for new onset Alzheimer's disease. Oh, excuse me. And the last one was the Furman study, and this was the COVID-19 and the impact on Alzheimer's disease pathology. Thank you. This study population comprised 6,245,000 older adults greater than 65, including 410,000 in the COVID-19 cohort and 5.8 million in the non-COVID-19 cohort. It looked at the possibility it may contribute to Alzheimer's disease onset. There were adults younger than 65 in this database, as we'll see, and there were people in the data set who wound up with Alzheimer's disease younger than 65. And I'm going to go straight to that slide. So this is the one that's, as you can see over here on the left, this was a less than 65 years of age cohort. And the black diamond here shows that there were some people that it seems like it pushed them into Alzheimer's disease. You can't say that it is definite because the confidence interval on this crosses that line. But it is pretty strong that is likely. And this is a schematic representation of the different shared influence of Alzheimer's disease and the COVID-19 risk factors. There was the spike proteins we heard about in COVID-19. There was the Alzheimer's disease with neuron loss and degeneration, impaired clearance of A beta, which worsened tau pathology. All these are common factors that we see with COVID-19 injury to the brain and Alzheimer's disease. The next thing I want to touch base on real quick is the era of monoclonal antibody therapy. And this is where we are now, that we actually have a treatment now for Alzheimer's disease. When I was in practice, we really didn't have very wonderful treatments. We had some medicines that we tried to stimulate the brain. I tried some of those myself when I first found out I had Alzheimer's, and they weren't very easy on my stomach, and I don't suppose they are on many patients' stomachs. But what we are in now is lecanemab in early Alzheimer's disease. And lecanemab, just like these monoclonal antibodies that we're using for things like lupus, we're using them for even treating migraine headaches. There's different monoclonal antibodies for all sorts of things, but now we have a monoclonal antibody to try to take out the abnormal proteins from our body that are causing Alzheimer's disease. So back to my story, identifying with Odysseus. As a result, I lost my job as a primary care physician due to symptoms of memory loss in the summer of 2023, which would also cause me to lose my insurance in just a few short months. My neurologist suggested we pursue monoclonal antibody treatment, but the process of getting treated with lecanemab for early Alzheimer's disease was a surprising slog. I received a prescription from my neurologist to start it in September 2023. I had insurance coverage until November 27th, 2023 from my former employer. My former employer's insurance carrier initially denied our when we applied for lecanemab treatment. My wife made multiple calls to figure out what steps to take next. My neurologist said he would call the insurance company. Once that occurred, approval was given to start treatment. My first appointment was set for November 8th, 2 months later. My wife notified the infusion center that I would be using excuse me, I got to move, our Cobra, our Cobra insurance after November 27th. Although at that point my wife had insurance with another provider through her new job, it was not worth the risk of potentially being denied coverage at that point. So we stuck with the Cobra insurance. We were told there is a window of time for treatment. It's unknown how quickly I would progress, hence our desire to start treatment as soon as possible. Did you know we learned the hard way that Cobra can legally be delayed by paperwork? Our insurance refused to cover treatments for December. The infusion center likewise was not sympathetic with our plight. Cobra law states that insurance payments will be retroactive to avoid situations like this, but neither the insurance company nor the infusion center were willing to begin treatment. We even had paperwork showing Cobra is in process. How could a patient with confusion navigate this? My wife spent hours on the phone with Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Department of Labor, the American Benefits Group, my physician's office, and infusion center, different stakeholders. We were told by the infusion center we would have to pay out of pocket, which is $2,500 for the next scheduled treatment, or I would have to skip it. My hero, my wife, my infrastructure to receive lecanemab infusions is not patient. Excuse me, I gotta move this. I can't see where I was.
This small button.
Hit that button around. Okay, thank you. So thank you. My wife's helping me here. Lecanemab infusion is not in place to be patient friendly to work smoothly. One person involved with the approval process described it as building an airplane while in the air. We chose to pay the exorbitant Cobra premiums for 2024 to ensure coverage. There was no guarantee another insurance company would approve the treatment in a timely fashion. We paid the Cobra premiums for 2024 to ensure the coverage. No guarantee other insurance companies would approve timely treatment. Insurers have their own requirements for approval. It's not standardized. We had $6,000 out of pocket maximum reached in 2 months. Our financial hit was over $14,000, and I am now unemployed. Without an advocate and without financial savings, how can anyone with mild cognitive impairment get access to treatment? In trouble. Sorry. Is that the last? That is the last one. That is my last slide. So yeah. So that's my presentation. I'm going to stop share now, and I'm open for any questions.
Dr. Beasley, thank you so much. That was so comprehensive and such a great comprehensive look from the perspective of a person with a diagnosis and your medical expertise. So I think we mentioned, you mentioned that you weren't getting paid and no disclosures. If I had $1 million to pay you or more, I would give it to you. But maybe talk with the development office at KU and we'll see if we can make that happen.
Not necessary.
In the meantime, Marie in the chat had a question about whether you checked or found for any correlation between any of the COVID vaccines and onset of Alzheimer's.
I could not. That's a good question, and it's a fair question. And people had a lot of concerns about the COVID-19 vaccines when they first came out. I could not find anything about COVID-19 vaccines causing Alzheimer's disease.
Great. I think that's kind of a relief. I know that so many of us, especially on the professional side at KU, are really interested in finding, the switch, the trigger, the button, whatever we can push to either not get Alzheimer's in the first place or to stop it. And whenever we find out that there's not a correlation with something, I think we all sort of say, oh, thank goodness. So thank you for confirming that. Renee says in the chat, this was very informative and frankly terrifying. Renee, I think you're probably reflecting a lot of opinions here. There's so much about dementia that's not under any of our control. And so when you face this with the grace that Dr. Beasley has, I think that's so remarkable. We have a question from Maurice. I hope I'm spelling or saying that right. How many doses of medication have you had now? And do you see any change?
What month did I start?
Started 1st of November, so I think you're.
So I started the 1st of November, and I get it every 2 weeks. So
6 months. I think that's
Cindy says 12 treatments, she thinks.
Wow. Okay.
And have I seen any changes? Let me ask my wife, have you seen any changes?
Yeah, I think we initially saw most of the dramatic changes were from the beginning. I would say he is better than he was a year ago when he was first diagnosed. That doesn't mean that the signs of Alzheimer's are gone. There are still those signs, but they are not as intense. It gave him clarity. It's given you focus, and it's allowed us to live a pretty normal life for longer than what I thought we would have. So,
but I have some real bad days sometimes.
But sometimes you have bad days, and if you're stressed and you're tired, then it comes out.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you. For both of you, I hope you see the comment from Joan in the chat that says, what a great human being you are. Your wife is the kind of partner we all strive to be. Good luck.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
My mother says in the chat, is professional courtesy no longer current? This is an inquiry from an old RN, which is my mom, and an MD, which is my dad. And they finished, I can say this, they finished college and medical school in the 60s and 70s and worked through the 80s and 90s. So what about professional courtesy? I mean, can you call up Dr. Burns and say, hey, Dr. Burns, give me some free lecanemab?
Do you know, I think, and I'll jump in on this. I think the big change now is we are no longer private offices, right? We don't have those flexibilities anymore. We've become big systems. And so that was a big surprise to me because I've been with my husband on this medical journey for 30 years in his training. And we use professional courtesy, particularly early on in our, residency days. We didn't have any money, and professional courtesy was a thing. And it was kind of who you know, and you could maneuver around that. I will tell you that it didn't matter who I knew trying to maneuver this. There were so many different pieces and so many different systems, and the systems aren't talking to each other very well. Nobody really knows who's in charge of what. As that person described, it's like putting an airplane together in the air. That's exactly how it felt. And as much as I would love professional courtesy, it didn't exist in this case. The doctors were kind. Everybody wanted to help, but now we've got these computer systems that are impersonal, and we don't have the flexibility anymore to do what we were able to do in the past. So sadly, no.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. On the social work side of the ADRC, that's one of my goals, is to be able to connect communities and families and healthcare professionals to sort of knock down some of those barriers. Besides knowing a little bit about Alzheimer's disease, I'm also a Medicare educator, and figuring out how Medicare can help cover these exorbitant costs is one of my favorite things to think about and pester people about. So Dr. Beasley, your story is going to go into my arsenal of why this matters. So thank you for that. We have another Peggy in the chat who says her husband's been taking the infusion since September, and they have seen an improvement since his diagnosis. So that's so hopeful. And then we've got, it's really unbelievable that there is not any professional courtesy. That's too bad. I think people go into the healthcare field because they want to be courteous. They want to be able to help people. And it's too bad that, and these opinions are mine, by the way. It's too bad that capitalism interferes with that sometimes.
one thing I would say is the nursing staff at the KU Infusions Center are fabulous. They're doing a great job. And Dr. Burns has been really helpful to us.
And people are nice and they want to help. To your point, these are caregivers, right? But there are now systems that prevent being able to help the way we were able to in the past. So
Absolutely.
And
Well,
the expense of these drugs, the expense
Mhm.
of these drugs doesn't allow for, I mean, I couldn't say, hey, can you give me a dose, for free? There's no way. It's 2,600 a pop.
Wow. Okay. Renee, I see your hand. Hang on. M. Wallace wants to know, has said, my wife has been diagnosed being in early stages and is in complete denial. How helpful or easy has it been for you, Dr. Beasley, to accept your diagnosis?
Yeah.
go for it.
Um, I guess the things that I did not want I did not want to harm patients. Um, when I found out, as I said, did not recognize I was having trouble. I did not recognize I was asking patients questions repeatedly. Um, and so I'm at this point in my life, uh, I'm very concerned about how am I driving, let alone how could I take care of patients. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to be put people at harm medically. I don't want to put people at harm driving down the street. I've asked my wife to watch me and let me know when it's time to stop. Um, I it is hard. It's hard. I don't know that I had denial as much as uh, it was good to know what the problem was. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Mhm.
I really couldn't figure out why I was struggling so much. And speaking of struggling, it is really hard for technology. I used to be a whiz at putting PowerPoint together. I used to be able to do all this myself, and it's just a struggle now.
I think, I think his being a physician is kind of what tipped the scale to your point. Because your first, you do no harm, right? That is the oath that you take. And so in some ways that really kind of did force that acceptance. I think had he been in a different profession, perhaps this would have been pushed down the line a little more. But not wanting to harm people. And then also having patients who he's treated in the past and knowing what a difficult path that is for family members. I will tell you that Brent from day one has been concerned about me and making sure that I have the help that I need. And the only way I'm going to get the help that I need to help him is if he's honest about his diagnosis. So here we are.
I
Wow.
actually,
Thank you.
uh,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say to that point, I actually shared with my whole church about having Alzheimer's disease even before my wife was ready for me to do so. So
Wow. Dr. Beasley, Amy just said in the chat, most grateful for your transparency, and I will certainly echo that. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your story. We are definitely past our end time, but I've noticed most of you have stayed, which I think is a testament to you, Dr. Beasley, for, I guess all of you have stayed, but it's a testament to you. And your story is so compelling and so affirming. Renee, if you want to go ahead with your question, if people have to leave, you can. And then we also have a question about whether you're still driving, Dr. Beasley, or have you totally stopped?
I'm still driving at this point, but as I said, I've asked my wife to watch me and let me know when it's time to stop because I don't want to hurt anybody.
Monitor very closely. So far, so good. Driving is a long-term, deep skill, and it has not been compromised at this point. So,
Yeah,
But I suspect it will be at some point if this continues to worsen.
sure. Okay, Renee, one last chance. You're welcome to.
My question was about your infusions And have you gone to KU Hospital for all your infusions, or have you tried infusion centers or anything else like
Yeah.
that?
KU infusions.
Yeah, KU has an infusion center that's about 1 mile, 103rd Homes, about a mile from my house, 2 miles maybe.
Okay.
It's pretty close. So I'd ride my bike there on good days.
Wow, that's great for your brain, your heart, everything. Great for KU. That's my shameless plug to remind you how lucky you all are, those of you who are in Kansas City anyway, to live in the backyard of one of just 33 Alzheimer's disease research centers in the country. I mean, that is pretty special, especially with the advances we're making. To be so close to where the research is happening is really a gift, I think, to all of us, and is especially a gift for people like Dr. Beasley, who are willing to take the infusions and let us know how things are going. And I'm so affirmed to read from people in the chat and from you, Dr. Beasley, that you've noticed improvement in the infusions. That's just fantastic. Gosh, 23 years ago when I was a young Alzheimer's expert, we did not have infusions. I don't even know that they were on the horizon. And so it's so nice to see that we've advanced and that we've got some movement toward treatment and a cure. So with that said, I think we could stay all afternoon, but I want to respect everybody's time, and Dr. Beasley, especially yours. Thank you so much. I'm going to stay in touch with you, Dr. Beasley, and hope that maybe you would join us again for some more conversation. Thumbs up. I love it. Next week, I think I might regret this, but next week's speaker is me. So a tough act to follow, everyone. Maybe you'll forget about this great one by a week from today. But I am going to be talking about traveling with someone who's experiencing cognitive change, and give you, I hope, some tips for caregivers and for people experiencing cognitive change. Dr. Beasley, if you have any tips, feel free to email me. And so
I need your presentation. Help me. We're going on vacation next week.
Right. Okay. Well, that's why I timed it that way. I wanted to get it out before Memorial Day. So we'll see. So that's what we'll talk about next week. I will be your like on Saturday Night Live again, host and your musical guest, and we'll talk about travel. So if there's anything you have questions about that before Thursday, feel free to email and I'll see what I can do to respond to those. I am going to get this video ready to post hopefully by the end of today or tomorrow at the latest, so that anybody who wants to read or see it again, you can. Dr. Beasley, I also have your slides. Are those okay to share with people? Great. Okay. So if you've already emailed me to say you want the article and or the slides, I'll do that. If not, feel free. And we have one last question from Maurice. I have to answer all the questions. And that question is, do you know if Medicare covers this medication? I can tell you that Medicare covers lecanemab as a Part B drug. With Medicare Part B, Medicare pays 80%. The beneficiary pays 20%. Price tag on the infusions is a lot of dollars, thousands of dollars. So Medicare does cover. It is quite expensive. One way to participate in getting the drug might be to participate in clinical trials. That's a way to get drugs in a lot of ways, at lower or no cost. I cannot promise you that that will work for everybody, but it is one way. So the short answer is that yes, thank you for validating, Peggy. Yes, Medicare does cover it. It's still a pretty significant expense for most people, which just goes to show Alzheimer's is no respecter of persons. I mean, people of all walks of life are affected by this disease, and that's why we're working so hard to get this figured out. Okay, so I'm gonna close this out now. Thank you again, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Peggy. Your insurance covers the rest. Sounds like you've got some great insurance. Glad to read that. And I will see anybody that chooses to come here about travel next week. Have a great week, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Beasley. Thank you, Mom. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
I love that your mother's there.
Me too. My favorite. She didn't tell me, it was a surprise.